Hey, what's up? And welcome back to Full Academy, where we help you to understand, think, and see the game at a higher level. In previous episodes, we've talked about how great building investments can really help you to boost up your overall income and grow your city faster. We've also talked about what it takes to develop your investment capabilities, such as having a higher level ARC, snipe partners, good external and internal 1.9 threads, and an optimized snipe list. But today, we're going to go back to basics and talk about how to make good investments. Now, this is not about the actual mechanics of investments and adding forge points onto a building. Knowledge of how to do that is assumed here, because the fact is that anyone can throw forge points onto another player's great building. So this is about putting your forge points on the right buildings so that your forge points are working for you and so that your investments are going to provide a nice stream of income. So that's why this episode is going to focus on what goes on in the mind of the smart investor and the fundamental differences between good and bad investments. So let's start with some of the basics of great building investments. On the left, you see how things are set up and the rules that Inno has made when it comes to investing in great buildings. Let's go over some of them. Each great building level requires a certain number of forge points to get it completed. And those forge points need to either come from the player themselves or from other players. And the only other players that can invest in your great buildings are your friends, your guildmates, and your hoodies. Finally, contribution rewards are given for the top 5 spots, forge points, blueprints, medals, and so on. If you're not in the top 5, you don't get anything. So those are the rules, but what's just as important as the rules are the implications that they have to the owner and investor. And that's what's shown on the right here. The owner has control over when the leveling activity is initiated. They are the one that's going to unlock the next great building level for investment. They also have control over whether they invest their own forge points in the great building and how many forge points they are going to invest. Now, the investor has control over whether to invest and how much to invest. But what is in doubt or not certain is the investor's return on investment and the timing of the leveling. Those aspects are going to get decided by the interactions and interplay between the great building owner and the investors. So the first key takeaway for aspiring investors is to realize that investments come with a lot of uncertainty. Unlike fighting, negotiating, other income, or city collections, great building investment income is rarely instantaneous. When you invest in a building, you only get your contribution rewards when the great building flips. And unless the investor flips it themselves, there's always going to be a delay or a time gap between the investment and the reward. As a result, every great building carries some risk, either in terms of the potential return on investment or the timing for getting your contribution reward. Every time you invest in a great building, you are risking your forge points. And no matter how careful you are, the potential for risk always exists. For example, if you've sniped enough, you know that sometimes another sniper puts down their forge points just before you put down yours, and you end up overpaying for a spot, and that can be very costly. On the timing side of things, the time gap between when you invest and when you get your reward could range from very short all the way to never. Never, because sometimes the great building owner retires or and I've seen and heard about this happening. Sometimes the owner will sell off the building and you lose all of the forge points that you put down. One of the most common mistakes that an investor can make is to concentrate too much on the expected return. They'll see what they think is a really profitable snipe and immediately put down enough forge points to lock up their spot. But before we go into why that can be a mistake, consider this question. Let's say that you had 100 forge points to invest in one of four great buildings. And to make this a little bit simpler, let's say that these spots are all covered and that the great buildings will definitely level. Which of these four options is the best investment? Is it the one with a 1%, 10%, 100%, or 200% potential profit? If you answered A, B, C, or D, then I would say that you got this wrong, because I think that the answer is actually E, which if I listed it would say none of the above or not enough information given. And that's because I haven't told you how long it will take for each of these great buildings to level. So while a 200% return might look great, what if the leveling time for that great building is 1 year? Yeah, you'll make your 200% profit, but those forge points could probably have been put to better use than just sitting on that player's great building for a year. Give me a 1% return on a building that levels in 30 minutes instead of that 1 year investment any day. Because I'll get my investment back in a short amount of time and get a small profit, and then I can move on and put my 101 forge points on another promising great building. So I hope you can see that timing can be just as, if not more important than the expected return. And I illustrate this with this plot on the right, which describes the relationship between the expected return and the time that it takes the great building to level. This should look familiar to those that are in finance. It's my attempt to adapt the CAPM to Forge of Empires. What this basically says is that the longer you have to wait, the more profit you should expect to see. How much more profit you should really expect depends on your own individual tastes and preferences. For example, some may think that a 10% profit with a 1 week leveling time is okay. But others may disagree and may turn that down because they would expect to get 20% if they had to wait a week for the great building to level. So it really depends on the person. But regardless of where the green zone is for you, I think the key takeaways are, first, a small profit can be good if the leveling time is short. And a large profit and a longer leveling time can be good too, as long as the profit is large enough to justify the wait. Second, really tiny profits and short leveling times can be bad, especially if you're really forge point rich and don't feel that tiny profits are worth your time. But third, what you really want to avoid is the stuff that's deep in this red zone, the low profits and long leveling times. So when trying to tell the difference between a good investor and a bad investor, it really comes down to how they manage risk and uncertainty. Just like in the real world, a smart investor will look to build a portfolio of investments that mixes or blends the different levels of risk. And for high risk investments, and I'm especially talking about investments where you need to put down a lot of forge points and that the leveling time is uncertain, you need to be sure that you're being sufficiently compensated with a higher expected return. So while you and I may have differences or different ideas about what level of compensation is sufficient, I don't think it's a stretch to say that everybody should be cautious before putting down 2,000 forge points on a building of someone that they don't know if it's only going to give a 1% return at best. And I can say that for myself. I always have at least 100,000 forge points in investments spread across about 100 to 150 great buildings. And so I'm constantly building up and feeding this pipeline of investments so that my forge points are working for me and so that I can have a nice stream of investment income flowing in each day as great building owners level their buildings. If I've given you the impression that a smart investor is always really conservative and is constantly playing defense, it's important to note that that is not always the case. Because a really good investor is actually always hungry for action, but on their terms. They will actively seek out opportunities and situations that give them more control over the situation and that puts the ball in their court. Even though they can never completely eliminate risk, the savvy investor will always find ways to reduce the risk and uncertainty in their investments. And I've listed some examples of the things that they might do, like taking covered spots, contributing to great buildings of people that they know and trust, etc. Another thing that I like to do is negotiate with the great building owner. There have been several times where an owner complains to me and asks me to stop sniping their buildings and instead contribute 1.9. But instead of immediately giving in or dropping them as a friend, what I do is sometimes I write back and say, and this is because I have a level 150 arc, I say, send me your P1s as soon as they become available, and I'll take them for 1.9 on any building that you're going to level in 48 hours. And that's how I create a win-win situation for both myself and the great building owner. They get their 1.9 and I get a reasonable, predictable profit and greater confidence about the investment timing and maturity date. The key theme in all of these examples is to look for signs, signals, or relationships that give you more confidence that you're going to get the return that you're expecting, and that the great building owner is going to level their building reasonably quickly. It also works the other way too. If you are a great building owner and you're trying to encourage investment, then you should look to send signals out there that you are trustworthy and reliable. For example, when I'm asking a friend or a guildmate to take a spot on my great building for 1.92 or higher, I often add a note to let them know that I'm going to level in a short amount of time. Like, for example, I might say, oh, take the second spot. I'm going to level in less than 8 hours. That's because the last thing that an investor wants, even if it's a friend or a guildmate, is to loan out a lot of forge points at 1.9 plus, and then watch as those forge points just sit on your great building for days. And for those that are running guild threads, players tend to pick up spots faster when the expected or required leveling time is reduced, especially for 1.9 plus threads. So for example, if I'm running a 1.94 or 1.96 or a full value thread, I'm going to make clear that you need to level your buildings in 48 hours or 36 hours or 24 hours or something like that. So that's it for this episode on great building investments. I hope that this provided you with a better understanding of investments so that you can make better investment decisions, so that you can minimize your risks and losses and grow your overall income so that you can power up your city more quickly. Thanks, and I'll see you for the next episode on great buildings with overlapping benefits. Thank you, and please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel.